What would you do if you thought you were the last human alive? This is the haunting question at the heart of one of the Bible's most controversial stories, the story of Lot's daughters. Found in Genesis 19, this passage has puzzled scholars and believers for centuries. It's a tale of survival, desperation, and an act so shocking that many prefer to ignore it altogether. But why is this story in the Bible? And what does it truly reveal? The story of Lot and his daughters is not just about them, it's about human nature itself. When faced with fear, isolation, and uncertainty, how far will people go to ensure their survival? Were Lot's daughters making a desperate choice in a world that seemed destroyed, or was there something more to their actions? Did they have another option, or were they victims of a situation beyond their control? Many biblical stories are widely discussed and analyzed, but this one remains in the shadows, spoken of in hushed tones, if at all. Yet, it raises some of the most profound moral and ethical dilemmas in all of Scripture. And as uncomfortable as it may be, ignoring it would mean missing out on important lessons, not just about the past, but about human decisions and morality even today. Because this isn't just an ancient story. It's about how people react under pressure, how fear can cloud judgment, and how extreme situations lead to extreme choices. The question of whether Lot's daughters were villains or victims is not just a biblical debate, it's a question about the very nature of morality in times of crisis. To understand the full weight of this moment, we first need to step back, to the very beginning. Who was Lot, and how did he end up in the sinful city of Sodom? To understand the controversial story of Lot's daughters, we first need to understand Lot himself. Who was he? Why did he choose to live in Sodom, a city so corrupt that God decided to destroy it? And what role did his decisions play in the events that followed? Lot wasn't just any man, he was the nephew of one of the most significant figures in biblical history, Abraham. When God called Abraham, then known as Abram, to leave his homeland and journey to a new land that he would reveal, Lot went with him. This decision would shape the course of his life, placing him at the center of divine blessings but also leading him into dangerous territory. As Abraham and Lot traveled together, both men became wealthy, accumulating large flocks, herds, and servants. But prosperity led to problems. Their growing wealth caused tension between their herdsmen, as the land they shared could no longer sustain both of their expanding flocks. To prevent conflict, Abraham proposed a solution: they would separate and settle in different areas. Abraham, despite being the elder and the leader, gave Lot the first choice of where to settle. Instead of deferring to his uncle, Lot looked out at the land and chose what appeared to be the best option, the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley, where Sodom and Gomorrah were located. At first glance, this seemed like a wise decision. The region was lush and well-watered, perfect for someone with large flocks and herds. But there was a problem. The people of Sodom were known for their wickedness. Genesis 13 verse 13 describes them as great sinners against the Lord. Yet, Lot moved closer. And eventually, he didn't just live near Sodom, he lived in Sodom. Over time, Lot became more than just a resident. He gained a position of influence, sitting at the city gate, a role typically reserved for elders and leaders. This suggests that he was respected among the people of Sodom, or at least tolerated. But while Lot may have found success in Sodom, he was surrounded by moral corruption. The Bible does not go into detail about Lot's daily life in Sodom, but it does show that he was deeply troubled by the city's sins. In 2 Peter 2 verses 7-8, Lot is described as a righteous man who was tormented by the evil around him. Yet, despite this inner turmoil, he remained in the city. Why didn't Lot leave? Was it the wealth and comfort that kept him there? Did he believe he could change the people of Sodom? Or was he simply too entangled in the city's way of life to escape? Whatever the reason, his choice to stay would have devastating consequences. Meanwhile, far from Sodom, Abraham had a divine encounter. 3 mysterious visitors, later revealed to be the Lord and 2 angels, came to him with an urgent message: Sodom and Gomorrah were about to be destroyed due to their extreme wickedness. Abraham was horrified. Not only was Lot living in Sodom, but what if there were righteous people in the city? Could they be spared? In one of the most remarkable moments in Scripture, Abraham pleaded with God, asking if he would spare the city if 50 righteous people were found. When God agreed, Abraham kept pushing. What about 45? 40? 30? 20? Finally, he asked, what if only 10 righteous people are found? And God answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Genesis 18 verse 32. This conversation reveals two things. First, it shows Abraham's deep compassion, even for a city as sinful as Sodom. Second, it highlights just how far gone Sodom was, because not even 10 righteous people could be found. With destruction looming, 2 angels arrived in Sodom, appearing as travelers. Lot, still holding on to his sense of hospitality, insisted they stay at his home for the night. But danger was everywhere. That very night, the men of the city surrounded Lot's house, demanding that he hand over the strangers so they could abuse them. Lot refused, even offering his own daughters instead, an act that is difficult to comprehend today. But in the culture of the time, hospitality was sacred, and protecting guests was seen as a duty above all else. This horrifying moment shows just how deeply Lot had been influenced by the corrupt moral standards of Sodom. The situation escalated until the angels intervened, striking the men of the city with blindness. They then gave Lot a final warning, get out now. The city will be destroyed by morning. At dawn, Lot was still hesitating. The angels had to physically take him, his wife, and his daughters by the hand and lead them out. They commanded him to flee to the mountains and not to look back. Lot had chosen to live in Sodom, and now he was being forced to leave everything behind. But the danger wasn't over yet. Ahead lay a devastating loss, one that would mark the beginning of his family's tragic downfall. As dawn broke over Sodom, the city was on the brink of destruction. The angels had delivered their warning, but even with fire and judgment looming, Lot hesitated. Perhaps it was the weight of leaving behind everything he had built, his home, his possessions, and the life he had known. Perhaps it was disbelief that the city he had lived in for so long was truly beyond saving. But there was no time for doubt. The angels physically took Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hand and pulled them out of the city, a sign of both urgency and mercy. They had only one command. Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away. Genesis 19 verse 17. Lot, still hesitant, begged for a compromise. He feared he wouldn't make it to the mountains in time and pleaded to take refuge in a small nearby town called Zoar. The angels granted his request, and with that, Lot and his family ran, leaving behind a city about to be consumed by divine wrath. Then it happened. From the sky, fire and sulfur rained down upon Sodom and Gomorrah, consuming everything in an instant. The cities were obliterated, homes, temples, streets, and every trace of civilization reduced to ash. The land that had once been green and fertile was transformed into a desolate wasteland. Smoke rose into the sky like the aftermath of a volcanic eruption, a grim testament to the city's sins. The destruction was absolute. No one survived. Not the men who had pounded on Lot's door the night before, not the leaders who had welcomed corruption, not even innocent children caught in the chaos. The judgment of Sodom was swift, merciless, and final. But in the midst of their escape, something went terribly wrong. Lot, his daughters, and his wife had been warned, do not look back. But as they ran, Lot's wife did the unthinkable. She turned around. In that moment, she was instantly transformed into a pillar of salt. The Bible does not tell us exactly why she looked back, but many theories exist. Was it curiosity? A longing for the life she was leaving behind? A hesitation to fully trust God's command? Whatever the reason, her choice sealed her fate. In one moment, she was a wife and mother running for safety. In the next, she was gone, a frozen monument to hesitation and disobedience. Lot and his daughters could do nothing but keep running. They had just lost a wife and mother, their home, their community, everything they had ever known. The trauma of this moment cannot be overstated. They had barely escaped death. They had watched their home be consumed by fire. And now, they had lost a family member in the most horrifying way possible. What must have been going through their minds? Fear, if this could happen to their mother, what else awaited them? Guilt, could they have done something to stop her? Shock, their world had been shattered in a single day. They had gone from a wealthy, established family in Sodom to desperate fugitives in the wilderness. No home. No security. No sense of what came next. Lot and his daughters eventually reached Zoar, the small town he had begged to flee to. But something about the place unsettled him. Perhaps he feared the town would be destroyed next. Perhaps he no longer trusted any city after what had happened to Sodom. Whatever the reason, he did not stay. Instead, he and his daughters left Zoar behind and found refuge in a cave in the mountains, a dark, empty place that mirrored the desolation in their hearts. Imagine the silence that filled that cave. The weight of everything that had happened. The crushing loneliness of believing they were the only ones left in the world. It is in this cave, cut off from society, stripped of everything, and drowning in fear, that the minds of Lot's daughters begin to spiral. What if they were truly the last people alive? What if the human race was doomed unless they acted? This is where desperation turns into something unthinkable. The cave was silent. Lot and his daughters had escaped with their lives, but at what cost? Their mother was gone, their home was destroyed, and the world as they knew it had vanished in fire and smoke. The only sounds that remained were their own breaths and the flickering echoes of distant memories. And then came the fear. The daughters of Lot had grown up in a city filled with people. Now, they knew only emptiness. In their minds, they were the last survivors on earth. They had witnessed God's wrath firsthand, and as far as they could tell, no other human life remained. They were alone, with no husbands, no future, and no way to preserve their father's lineage. And so, out of desperation, or perhaps something deeper, they made a choice. One night, the older daughter turned to the younger and whispered words that would change the course of history. "Our father is old, and there is no man around to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him to preserve our family line." Genesis 19 verses 31 to 32. To modern ears, this plan is unthinkable. But in their minds, it was the only way. Their world had collapsed overnight, and their survival instincts had taken over. In ancient cultures, a woman's worth was tied to her ability to bear children, especially male heirs. Without husbands or children, they believed their family would be erased from history. But rather than seeking another solution, they turned to deception. The sisters gathered wine, likely brought from Sodom before the destruction. That night, they intoxicated their father until he was no longer aware of his actions. When he was lost in his drunkenness, the older daughter lay with him. Lot never resisted, because he never realized what had happened. The text is clear that Lot was unaware of what was taking place. That night, they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. Genesis 19 verse 33. The act was done. A forbidden seed had been planted. But for the younger daughter, something else stirred in her mind. The next night, they did it again. This time, it was the younger daughter's turn. So they got their father to drink wine that night also, and the younger daughter went in and slept with him. Again, he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. Genesis 19 verse 35. By the time Lot awoke from his stupor, the damage was done. Both daughters had conceived. This passage raises unsettling questions. Were Lot's daughters truly convinced they were the last people alive? Did they see no other option, or was there something more driving them? Was this solely about survival, or was it also about power? Some scholars argue that the daughters acted out of sheer panic, believing that humanity itself depended on them. Others suggest they knew other people were out there but used the catastrophe as an excuse to take control of their own futures. And then there is Lot himself. The Bible makes it clear that Lot was unaware both times, but how could he allow himself to become so drunk that he lost all self-awareness? Was it grief? Was it guilt? Or was it, in some way, a subconscious desire to forget everything he had lost? This is where the story turns from shocking to tragic. Because whether the daughters acted out of desperation or calculation, their actions would have consequences far beyond what they imagined. 2 sons would be born from this act. 2 nations would rise from their bloodline. And history would never be the same. The silence of the cave had been broken. The daughters of Lot had achieved their goal, both were pregnant. But what had they truly accomplished? In their eyes, they had saved their father's lineage. They had ensured survival. But what they could not have foreseen was how their actions would ripple through history, shaping entire nations and igniting conflicts that would last for generations. In time, the older daughter gave birth to a son. She named him Moab, which means, from my father. The younger daughter also bore a son, whom she named Ben-Ammi, meaning, son of my people. The very names of these children carried the weight of their origins, an unspoken truth that would follow their descendants forever. From Moab came the Moabites. From Ben-Ammi came the Ammonites. These were not small, insignificant tribes. They would grow into powerful nations, ones that would play crucial roles in biblical history, often in direct opposition to Israel. As time passed, the Moabites and Ammonites established themselves east of the Jordan River. But rather than forming an alliance with the descendants of Abraham, they became bitter enemies of Israel. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and toward the Promised Land, the Moabites and Ammonites refused to help them, Deuteronomy 23 verses 3-4. Instead, they tried to lead them into sin, luring them into idolatry and immorality. Balak, the king of Moab, hired the prophet Balaam to curse Israel, Numbers 22-24. When that failed, Moabite women seduced Israelite men, leading them to worship false gods, a sin that brought a deadly plague upon Israel. The Ammonites also opposed Israel repeatedly, waging wars against them during the time of the judges and kings. Their hostility led God to make a decree: no Moabite or Ammonite could enter the assembly of the Lord for 10 generations, Deuteronomy 23 verse 3. The stain of their origins and their continued defiance of Israel placed them outside the covenant blessings given to Abraham's descendants. Despite their dark beginnings and their enmity with Israel, the Moabites would one day produce one of the most famous women in biblical history, Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite woman who, against all odds, embraced the God of Israel. She left her homeland to follow her mother-in-law, Naomi, and became part of the Israelite people. Her faithfulness was rewarded. She married Boaz, a righteous Israelite, and became the great-grandmother of King David. This means that Jesus Christ himself descended from a Moabite woman. Even in the midst of sin, shame, and brokenness, God's plan for redemption was never far away. The story of Lot's daughters is unsettling. It forces us to confront the complexities of human decisions, the consequences of desperation, and the long-lasting impact of moral compromise. But it also shows something profound. Our choices shape the future. The actions of Lot's daughters did not end with them, they created entire nations. What we do today has a ripple effect beyond what we can see. Sin has consequences, but it does not have to define us. The Moabites and Ammonites were born out of a dark moment, but that did not mean they were beyond redemption. Ruth's story is proof that anyone, no matter their past, can be part of God's greater plan. God can bring good out of even the worst situations. What started as an act of fear and deception eventually became part of the genealogy of the Messiah. God's grace can turn even the darkest moments into something meaningful. This chapter of the Bible is not easy to read, but it serves as a reminder that history is complex, people are flawed, and redemption is always possible. The story of Lot's daughters is one of the most unsettling narratives in the Bible. It forces us to grapple with themes of desperation, survival, and the long-term consequences of human choices. But beyond the ancient setting and cultural context, this account holds valuable moral lessons that remain relevant today. Fear can cloud judgment. When Lot's daughters believed they were the last survivors, they acted out of panic, not faith. Instead of seeking guidance or waiting for God's provision, they took control of the situation through deception. This is a pattern seen throughout the Bible, and even in our own lives. Abraham and Sarah doubted God's promise of a son, so Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham, leading to family strife, Genesis 16. King Saul feared losing his kingdom and offered an unlawful sacrifice instead of waiting for the prophet Samuel, 1 Samuel 13. Peter panicked during Jesus' arrest and denied him 3 times, Luke 22 verses 54 to 62. In each case, fear led to actions with lasting consequences. The same is true for Lot's daughters. Their decision created 2 nations that would later become enemies of Israel. The lesson? Desperation should never override trust in God's plan. The daughters of Lot had just lost everything: home, security, community. Isolation made them feel like there were no other options. Psychologists today recognize that isolation can lead to distorted thinking. When people feel alone and without support, they are more likely to make extreme decisions, sometimes against their own values. This story reminds us of the importance of seeking counsel and surrounding ourselves with wise, godly people. When we face uncertainty, isolation is dangerous. Instead, we should seek wisdom from others and trust that God provides a way forward. This account raises a difficult question: do extreme situations justify extreme actions? Throughout history, people have faced moral dilemmas where survival seemed to demand compromise. In times of war, famine, or crisis, the line between right and wrong can become blurred. But the Bible repeatedly shows that God honors those who trust Him rather than taking matters into their own hands. Joseph refused to sin with Potiphar's wife, even though it led to imprisonment, Genesis 39. Daniel chose the lion's den rather than compromise his faith, Daniel 6. Jesus rejected Satan's temptation in the wilderness, refusing to take a shortcut to power, Matthew 4. Lot's daughters believed their situation justified their actions, but in contrast to these biblical examples, they acted without seeking God's guidance. The lesson? Faith should always come before fear. Even in the midst of moral failure, the Bible is a story of redemption. The Moabites and Ammonites became enemies of Israel, yet God still brought something good out of it. Through Ruth the Moabite, the lineage of King David and ultimately Jesus Christ was established. This is a powerful reminder that God can redeem even the darkest moments of human history. No mistake, no past, no failure is beyond God's ability to transform. This passage challenges us to think deeply about the choices we make in times of fear, the importance of seeking wisdom, and the power of redemption. Are we making decisions based on faith or fear? Do we let isolation cloud our judgment? Are we trusting in God's provision or taking shortcuts? The story of Lot's daughters is not just an ancient tragedy, it is a mirror reflecting the struggles of the human heart. It warns us of the dangers of acting without faith, but it also points us toward a God who can bring light from darkness and redemption from brokenness. The story of Lot's daughters is one of the most controversial and unsettling passages in the Bible. It does not offer easy answers, nor does it fit neatly into the categories of heroism or villainy. Instead, it forces us to wrestle with complex human emotions: fear, desperation, survival, and morality. But perhaps that is the point. At its core, this account is about how people respond to crisis. Lot's daughters, believing they were alone in the world, made a desperate decision. They saw no other path forward, so they took matters into their own hands. How often do we do the same? When we feel lost or hopeless, do we make impulsive choices instead of trusting in God's plan? Do we let fear control our decisions, justifying actions we might not take under normal circumstances? Are we patient enough to wait for God's provision, or do we force our own solutions? This story is a stark reminder that desperation can lead to compromise, but it also shows that our mistakes do not define us forever. Despite the moral weight of this story, it is not one of hopelessness. From this moment of human failure, God still brought about redemption. The Moabites and Ammonites, though often at odds with Israel, were not outside God's plan. Ruth, a Moabite woman, became a key figure in biblical history, proving that redemption is always possible. Even the most flawed people can be woven into God's greater story. This is the beauty of Scripture. It does not hide human brokenness, but instead shows how God can bring light even from the darkest situations. Now that we have explored the story in depth, the question remains. Were Lot's daughters victims of circumstance, or did they have another choice? The Bible does not give us a definitive answer, but it does invite us to reflect. What would we have done in their place? And more importantly, how can we apply these lessons to our own lives today? Let this story be a reminder: fear does not have to drive our decisions. God's redemption is always possible, no matter how hopeless a situation may seem.